Okay, on this episode of Cinema Disaster, I'm going to talk about the top, in my opinion, what the top punk films are. And I'm not talking about documentaries because there's like way too many of them to name. But what I am going to talk about is feature-length films that have came out over the years. Most of these, if you're a fan of punk rock, you've probably seen every one of these that I've named like a million times. So, first one I want to talk about here is Repo Man, which was directed by Alex Cox, who did the movie Straight to Hell, and he also did Sid Nancy. It was executive produced by Michael Nesmith from the band The Monkees. And I'm not going to talk a lot about these films. I'm just going to kind of give a very rough overview of what they are, since this is kind of like a top 10 list, or however many movies I'm going to name. This has got Xander Slosh in it from the band The Circle Jerks. Circle Jerks also make an appearance in this film as a lounge act, or a lounge band, and they do a lounge version of their song When the Shit Hits the Fan. On the soundtrack, it's got Iggy Pop, Black Flag, Suicidal Tendencies, Fear, The Plugs, and, well, obviously the Circle Jerks. It's basically about Emilio Estevez, and he's a punk rocker who ends up losing his job. Him and Xander Slosh actually lose their job at a supermarket. And he ends up getting kind of conned into becoming a Repo Man by Harry Dean Stanton's character, which you probably know from movies like Escape from New York, Pretty in Pink. I don't know, he's in a ton of stuff. But yeah, they're pretty much pursuing this car. It's a '64 Chevy Malibu that it's supposed to have like dead aliens in the trunk. So this is almost like science fiction meets action meets punk rock. So it's one of Emilio Estevez's very early roles, and there's a character in the movie named Miller who has lots of great things to say, lots of great lines in this movie, like the Mayans invented television, and you know, the more you drive, the less intelligent you are. You know, so Repo Man, you've probably already seen it, but if you haven't, you got to see this one. The next one I've already done a review on, so I'm really not going to talk about this much, but it's Dudes. Once again, starring Lee Ving from the band Fear. It also stars Flea, who also was in the band Fear in the early days, and then he went on to be in the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But, you know, it's like it's Penelope Spheris film, and like I said, it's kind of like a punk rock western or modern day western. So Dudes is the next one you need to go see, or need to see. This next film's actually not an older movie. I usually only do retro reviews, or I do cult films, horror films. I guess this is now a cult film. It came out in 2015 at Cannes, and then in 2016 in the United States, and that's Green Room, which has lots of great music on the soundtrack. It has Fear, The Bad Brains, Poison Idea. It's also got a lot of great metal bands on the soundtrack. It's got Midnight, Slayer, Obituary, Napalm Death. There's a band in the film. It's basically about a band called the Ain't Rights, who they're on tour, they're low on money. They end up playing like this gig that no one shows up at, and the promoter ends up getting them a gig at a different venue to kind of make up for it. And it ends up being a kind of like a club filled with Nazi skinheads. And they end up witnessing a murder, and they get locked in the green room. And they sort of have to try and escape, because you have this militant group of white supremacists that are trying to kill them. And this movie won a ton of awards, and it blew me away when I saw it. It's got Patrick Stewart in it, plays the head Nazi. And Anton Yellick is in it, which you might know from Terminator Salvation. Imogen Poots, Alia Shawkat. It's very exciting. It's kind of like a horror film meets like a suspense film meets an action movie. But anyway, yeah, see Green Room. Next one I want to do is Return of the Living Dead, which has another great soundtrack, which has The Cramps, 45 Grave, TSOL, The Damned. The whole deal with this movie is a lot of people think it's a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. But what happened was that when George Romero and John Russo did Night of the Living Dead, they had a difference in opinion on which way they wanted the series to go. So Romero ended up getting the rights to the Dead movies, so he made the sequels, obviously, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, and so on. Russo retained the rights to the term Living Dead, so he ended up making his own series. So there's Return of the Living Dead, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm not sure how many. It was actually written by Dan O'Bannon, who you might know for writing Life Force or Total Recall. But it's a zombie film. It follows kind of like a group of punk rockers who get caught up in this whole like zombie epidemic or whatever. Once again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's a great film. It's one of the best zombie movies. Next one I want to do is I want to talk about a movie called Control, which is about the movie about the band Joy Division, which I know most of you should know who Joy Division is. They're a post-punk band from the 70s, and this one was actually directed by Anton Corbijn, who did the music video Heart-Shaped Box for Nirvana. And if you like the band Joy Division at all, or even if you don't, or if you've never heard Joy Division, this is a good introduction to what they were all about and what they went through. So check that out. Next one is Sid Nancy, which is another Alex Cox film, and who I said did Repo Man. Gary Oldman plays Sid Vicious. Chloe Webb plays Nancy Spungen, which you might know her from Ghostbusters 2. And once again, it's pretty much, it's about the Sex Pistols, and it's about Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. A really good movie. And if you're into the Pistols, before I got into the Sex Pistols, I actually saw this movie before I even got into the band, and I loved this film, even though I didn't like the Pistols at the time. But later on, I grew to love the Sex Pistols, so even if you don't like the Pistols, check out this band. Or even if you like Gary Oldman or Chloe Webb or Alex Cox movies, this is a good one. The next one, a lot of people were not happy about, but I didn't find anything wrong with it, and that's What We Do Is Secret, which is about the band The Germs. And the Germs, obviously, were a Los Angeles punk band from the 70s that had Pat Smear in it, who went on to be in Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. It's also got Shane West, who plays Darby Crash, who was obviously the singer for the Germs and the Darby Crash band. And a weird side note is that after this movie came out, Shane West actually became the singer for the Germs, and when they got back together and went on tour. Because as most of you already know, Darby Crash killed himself the day before John Lennon was shot, because he entered a suicide pact with Casey Cola, which Casey Cola survived. So if you're a fan of the Germs, or if you've never heard them, watch this film. Next one I want to do is a movie called Rock and Roll High School, which is a Roger Corman film, and obviously this is about the Ramones. It's got also music by the Velvet Underground, Chuck Berry, Alice Cooper, It stars PJ Souls, who you probably know from Halloween or maybe the Bill Murray movie Stripes. And it's basically PJ Souls plays a character by the name of Riff Randall who's obsessed with the Ramones. And, it's kind of like a high school takeover film. And it's super campy, really, really cheesy, but in the best way possible. So you need to see this film right here. The last one is probably the most popular punk film that most people that are in the punk subculture know are involved in is Suburbia, which is also a Roger Corman film, and also directed and written by Penelope Spheris. It actually has the bands DI were in the movie, TSOL, the Vandals, which I failed to mention that the Vandals are also in the movie Dudes. Flea, once again, is in this film here. It actually also stars Wade Walston, who later on became the bass player for the U.S. Bombs. And it also stars a young Chris Peterson, who went on to be famous for for Twin Peaks, the original Twin Peaks series. He was also in Point Break. So this is another good one, and this one is just about a bunch of punks kind of living in a squat house and kind of like what they go through. It's a drama, but once again, it's a very good one. It's very gives you a lot of insight, I guess, about the 80s punk scene. I know I didn't mention every punk film ever. I didn't mention SLC Punk because I have a love-hate relationship with that film. I hated it for the longest time, and then I started liking it, and I hated it again. Now I'm sort of like, I think it's bad, but I enjoy it, so I didn't mention that. Also, This Is England is another movie I didn't mention because I've never seen it. It's on my list of movies to see, and I know I've heard from tons of my friends that it's a great film. So once I see that movie, I will do a review of it as well. But until next time, keep watching.